Okay, for the next step on this sewing table, I'm laminating all the pieces together before I put the epoxy on it and put the frame around it and level it and do all that good stuff. So what I'm doing is, usually what guys will do is they'll put on a lot of glue, smoothing it all out nice, have lots of glue on there, clamp it, and then leave it. I'm going to do something a little different, and I'm going to put the glue on, then I'm going to smoothen it out a bit. A little glue on there. Just take a little piece of stiff paper and just use it like a little squeegee, just smoothing it out a little bit just to get some adhesion on there. And I've got these all laid out, so basically all I do is I take a piece, square up the end, because these both ends are going to be squared off anyway, but I don't want to take off too much on one end and not enough on the other, so I'm kind of squaring this off initially. And I'm using a brad nailer with 2-inch brads, so they'll actually penetrate quite a ways through. So every time I nail this one, I'm nailing a couple layers down, and it'll do that throughout the whole process. So get that all loaded. I'm going to get them as close to smooth as possible on one side, which will be my top. The bottom will be router sledded, and then the top will be router sledded. So it really doesn't matter if they're perfect, but close is good. And just every once in a while, just throw a brad in to hold them in place. And this isn't the only method of adhesion or lamination that's going to be used. Once this is all cured up and ready for leveling, I'm going to be putting a coat of epoxy on here, and it'll run down in between all the little cracks and smoothing everything out just like I did with my workbench. And then it's going to be really nice, smooth surface. I can sand it down, stain it, varnish, do whatever I want to do with it. So I'm going to carry on, and this way I don't need a panel clamp, I don't need any other type of clamps. I can just nail them down and it should be good to go. So I'll get this done, and then we'll come back and see what I come up with next. Well, the tabletop is all glued and nailed, and I clamped it down to the workbench so that it would dry flat, or as flat as possible. And now comes the fun part, getting it all trimmed and squared up. So I've made a measurement here. This is going to be my guide for the saw. So this just runs along the guide, and it'll trim off probably 1/8 of an inch just to clean things up a bit. And then I'll do that with the other side, which is run a little bit more wild. So I'll be measuring off of the cut side to make sure everything is nice and parallel, get it all squared up, and then put on the trim boards. So I'll get that all done, and I'll be back. So I've got the edging on. This came out of just a stringer from a pallet, and as you can see, the yoke doesn't know it's from a pallet. So once you get it all trimmed up, it's just like any yoke that a furniture maker would use. So I got this all trimmed. This is the bottom, of course, because it's the roughest. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take some of this polyester resin and brush a nice heavy coat onto here, and it'll go down into a lot of the cracks. It'll help fill the cracks, and it'll help with the adhesion, make this top a lot more stable. And then I'll flip it over, and I'll do the top, and then we'll set up for the router sled to get her all nice and flat. So I've done the bottom side with a layer or coating of epoxy. Now I'm going to do the top side. So to do that, instead of just brushing it on, I don't want to put a whole lot of epoxy or resin on the top, because it's going to be smoothed off with the planer and all of it's going to get taken off anyway, except for what's in the cracks. So I'm going to use auto body squeegee that they use for putting body filler on, and I'm just going to put some resin on the top, and then I'm going to run it in, and this will help push it down into the cracks, and it'll keep a lot of the resin and epoxy off of the high spots. That color really comes out on this too. So that's what I'm going to do on the top. I'm going to give it one coat to try and get as much of the cracks filled as possible. Then I'll router sled it, get it flat, and we'll see if it needs any more on the cracks, and we'll go from there. So far it's looking good, and I'll be back when I'm ready for the next step. Now that I have both sides epoxied, it's time to get these things flattened. Now the green tape I put on the bottom side on the larger cracks so that the epoxy would stay in the crack and not flow through. That'll all come off with the router. So I got the router sled all set up here, and we're going to get routering. I'm going to flatten the bottom with one pass, then I'm going to flip it over and do the top. We shall return. So I got the bottom flattened, I flipped it over, and I started to flatten the top. So I'll just give you a before and after look at what's going on here. So here you can see the before, and then what it looks like after. It'll just need some sanding and then finishing, and there are still some substantial gaps, but I'll take care of those when I do the finishing. I'll fill them up. So I'll carry on, and after this is flattened, we'll work on the legs. So now I've taken the pallet stringers. These are nice oak ones without any notches cut in them, and I've cut into 29-inch lengths, and I'm going to put 3 of them together for each leg for the table. And I'll get these all glued up and clamped, and I'll show you what that looks like. Alright, completed.
Awesome.
And the video ends where it all started. Took long enough, but finally got her done. This, of course, is my collection of building materials, and the table I did for my mother's sewing machine. It turned out pretty nice. So after a long wait, finally got another video out, and as usual, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't. Let's grow some food.